I'm Yasmin. Hi.
And I'm Adam. I think we're going to be starting with my interview today.
Fabulous. The fabulous Adam. So Adam, in what ways would you say poverty has impacted your life the most?
It's hard to say, to be honest, but I didn't really have much of an impact of poverty in my younger years. I didn't really notice much in my childhood or my late teens, but when I first moved out age 17 with my partner, that's when I started to realize how expensive the world really is. I was the sole earner when it was just me and my partner. We had a small flat together while she was studying and I was working full time. And it seemed that no matter how many hours I worked, whether it be 40, 60, 80, or sometimes even 100 hours, the ends just still didn't meet. So even though I was working these crazy hours, I was still slowly creeping into debt throughout the years. We then had a son together, and I don't know what's more expensive, being an adult or having a child. So before we had our child, we were still crawling into debt. So with a child, we were nosediving into debt, really. And then when the relationship broke down, I ended up moving back into the family home. And I think my ex-partner did the same. She moved back in with her parents. And we split the custody between us. And even though I didn't have any house to pay for or any bills to pay for, this shadow of debt was still kind of looming over me, even though I'm still working all these hours with no bills to pay at this point. And when I moved back into the family home, it'd been about 2-3 years since I'd lived there, and the room I was living in at the time when I was younger wasn't available, so me and my son actually moved into the conservatory, which is nice enough, but the summers are searingly hot, and even though I got 2 big doors to open, there's not enough breeze in the world when you're living in a greenhouse, basically. And then the winters, there's not enough blankets in the world when you're in a room made of glass. It's bitterly cold.
We were talking earlier, briefly before we started having a chat here, and you alluded to the fact that you had a lot of responsibilities at a young age, and you mentioned briefly that you had family members who perhaps weren't very well and who you had to look after.
Yeah, so as well as looking after my young son at the time, I was working full-time in mental health nursing at the time. I came home from work after a night shift, went to sleep, and I was woken up early afternoon, and my stepfather had told me that my mother was trying to kill herself, which is something I never expected or even thought possible. I spent the next few days trying to get her the help she needed, which she wasn't too happy about. She ended up in hospital and I ended up homeless. I was sleeping in my car. And when I had my son, I had the privilege of staying at a friend's house on those days. And that was my life for a good few months. She was in hospital for quite a while. Me and my son and the rest of the family would visit as often as we could. But, yeah, it was my first experience of homelessness. And even though I had a friend's sofa and a car, I still had nowhere to kind of call my own.
And you were still living with debt at this time as well?
Yeah, so even though I'd been living at the family home in the conservatory for about a year and a half, almost 2 years at this point, I still had quite a big shadow of debt above me. So trying to find somewhere to live while you're in debt, it's impossible to get onto the private market because you need a deposit. And at this point, I couldn't even keep up with my credit card, bear in mind, put a deposit down. So I applied for the council waiting list as soon as I possibly could. And that's how I got the house I still live in today.
Right. And how long did that take?
So I would have applied as soon as I was made homeless, and I think I was living in my car for about 3, maybe 4 months, so not too long. I think things were sped up because I had a young son, which is great, and I'm very happy to have the house I have now, even if my garden is a hill. But after a while of me settling in, I'd left my job in mental health nursing because I just couldn't cope. I felt like some of the patients were probably having a healthier lifestyle than I was, which isn't a good outlook when you're working in nursing. So I left. I started working in the service industry. Within 3 months, I was working in management in the restaurant I was working. And that was actually the last time I ever saw my mother. She came into the restaurant with one of her close friends that we've known for years. I spent as much time with her when she came in as I could, and if I had known that was the last time I saw her, I don't think I'd let her leave. She finally took her life in the July of that year, and things haven't been the same since. I've struggled to keep up with a full-time job, as much as I've tried. I ended up losing my license, which meant I lost the job I was working in the remote location. So now I have a house and a car, but I can't afford or use either of them. Yeah, I think that's my story.
I'm struck by how much you had to carry at a young age, and also how no matter how hard you worked, no matter how many times you struggled to get back on your feet, circumstances that were out of your control were the things that kept knocking you back.
Yeah, it was like every time I got back up on my feet, the carpet was pulled from me, and then I got back up and the floor was pulled away, and then I'm sinking, and somehow I'm just constantly sinking. And then I think I found my feet again, and then I'm back down again. It's a painful cycle that I'm hoping will end at some point. And I'm close to being on my feet again, but we'll see. We'll see.
And with that in mind, why did you join the Poverty Truth Commission?
Well, even though it's not the most common story, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that will relate to my kind of story, especially with the taking the steps you think you can take, and then after you've taken them, realizing how big those steps are and your legs aren't that long. Mine definitely aren't. I think a big part of my story is having so many things that may seem to have monetary value, but having no way to utilize them to kind of improve your own life. And I guess there's the people who are homeless when, if you look at them on paper, they just really shouldn't be. I know I shouldn't have been, or at least I hope not. And I think it'd be a good thing, using my experience, to talk to those working in mental health services, homeless and housing services. And I've had the luxury of using a few food banks along the way, so it'd be nice to talk with some of them.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you, Yasmin.